What if everything you believed about love was a lie? What if the fairy tale you dreamed of slowly turned into a nightmare, leaving you questioning your worth, your choices, and your future? This is not just a story. It's a reality for countless people trapped in relationships that blur the line between in love and control. Today, we'll journey into the life of Osinachi, a woman who once believed she had found her happily ever after, only to discover that her greatest strength would come from the ashes of her deepest pain. But this isn't just about heartbreak. It's about transformation. It's about recognizing the warning signs, reclaiming your voice, and finding the courage to rise above even the darkest of circumstances. Osinachi's story is one of survival, resilience, and hope. A story that will challenge what you think you know about love and inspire you to value yourself above all else. As you listen, I encourage you to think about the relationships in your own life. Are they built on mutual respect and trust? Or do they carry the weight of control and fear? This story may touch a nerve, but it will also shine a light on the power of choice and the importance of self-love. Stay with us until the end, because what you'll hear today is more than just a story. It's a lesson, a warning, and a call to action. You deserve to be loved for who you are, without compromise, without fear. Let's begin. Osinachi was the kind of person whose presence lit up every corner of the small town of Abiya. Known for her radiant smile and warm heart, she had a way of making everyone feel special. So, when Emeka entered her life, it seemed like fate had finally gifted her the love story she deserved. Emeka was the perfect gentleman, charming, attentive, and with an irresistible sense of confidence that drew her in like a moth to a flame. He showered her with thoughtful gifts, heartfelt compliments, and tender moments that made her believe she had found her prince. The town quickly took notice of the new couple. Their admiration murmured in market stalls and along dusty streets. To them, Osinachi and Emeka were the epitome of perfection, a love story unfolding before their eyes. Together, they were like a dream, and Osinachi felt the warmth of happiness as she basked in the glow of newfound love. Emeka's kind words wrapped around her heart like a protective shield, making her feel safe, cherished, and deeply valued. She was convinced this was her fairy tale. But like any story, cracks began to appear beneath the surface. At first, they were subtle, almost invisible. Small remarks from Emeka disguised as concern. "Who were you talking to at the market today?" he would ask with a disarming smile. Or, "Don't you think that dress is a bit much for tonight?" His words felt like love's embrace, but their weight lingered in her mind. Though she shrugged them off as harmless expressions of care, something deeper seemed to stir beneath his sweetness. As days turned into weeks, Emeka's watchful gaze grew more evident. Little by little, his charm began to take on a sharper edge. The moments that had once made her heart flutter now carried a strange unease. The thought lingered in the back of her mind. Was this part of love? But love, she reasoned, always came with sacrifices. And if this was her fairy tale, she would do whatever it took to hold on to it. Osinachi's friends often teased her about how lucky she was to have found someone like Emeka. "You're living the dream," they'd say, their voices tinged with envy. She smiled in agreement, but deep down, a small part of her felt uneasy. Emeka's affection was undeniable, yet there was a subtle tension she couldn't quite name. Whenever he wrapped his arm around her shoulders in public, it felt both protective and possessive. She dismissed the thought, convincing herself that love was meant to feel intense, even overwhelming at times. The gifts and surprises kept coming, solidifying Emeka's image as the perfect partner in the eyes of everyone around them. From a delicate necklace to handwritten notes, he seemed to know exactly how to sweep her off her feet. Yet amidst the whirlwind of romance, his questions grew more pointed. "Why didn't you call me back right away? Who is this person commenting on your photos?" The questions came with a soft tone, almost playful, but the look in his eyes demanded answers. Osinachi reasoned that it was only because he cared. Her heart battled between the joy of being loved so intensely and the faint whispers of doubt creeping into her thoughts. Memories of their early days together brought comfort, how he had gone out of his way to win her over, how he had made her feel like the most important person in the world. It was easy to believe that his actions now were rooted in that same love. But as the comments and questions became more frequent, she began to feel a pressure she couldn't quite explain, like a cloud casting a shadow over her sunshine. The townspeople remained captivated by the couple's romance, their whispered admiration fueling the idea that Osinachi was living the life every girl dreamed of. She held tightly to that image, using it as a shield against the gnawing doubts in her heart. After all, wasn't love supposed to be all-encompassing? This is what happiness looks like, she told herself each night. Yet, in the quiet moments before sleep, her mind wandered to the subtle shifts she had noticed in Emeka's behavior. Was this how all fairy tales felt before the happy ending? The turning point came on a warm evening, as the golden hues of the setting sun bathed the town in a soft glow. Osinachi and Emeka were walking hand in hand, their silhouettes a picture of romance against the fading light. But when a familiar face greeted Osinachi with a friendly wave, Emeka's grip on her hand tightened ever so slightly. His smile remained, but his words carried an unmistakable edge. "You seem to have a lot of admirers," he said, his tone laced with something she couldn't quite name. She laughed nervously, brushing it off, but her heart skipped a beat for reasons she didn't want to admit. Later that night, Emeka's charm returned, as if nothing had happened. He told her how lucky he was to have someone as beautiful and kind as her, his words pouring over her like honey. For a moment, her unease melted away, replaced by the warmth of his affection. "He just loves me too much," she thought, convincing herself yet again that his actions were nothing more than a testament to his deep feelings. But deep within, she couldn't shake the sense that she was walking on a delicate thread, unsure of where it might lead. Osinachi began to withdraw ever so slightly, her bright laughter now tinged with hesitation. The world around her still marveled at their love story, but she started to feel the weight of a reality far different from the fairy tale everyone believed in. She found herself replaying moments in her mind, trying to piece together the puzzle of Emeka's behavior. Was this just a rough patch, or was there something darker lurking beneath his charming exterior? The questions haunted her, but she dared not speak them aloud. Not yet. By the time the town settled into slumber, Osinachi sat by her window, staring into the vast expanse of stars. The night was calm, but her heart was anything but. She wanted so desperately to hold on to the love she believed she had found, yet the small cracks in their perfect image seemed to grow wider with each passing day. "Tomorrow will be better," she whispered to herself, as though saying it aloud would make it true. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test every belief she held about love, trust, and herself. The early morning light filtered through the curtains of Osinachi's home, casting soft patterns on the walls. She woke to the sound of Emeka's text tone, a gentle reminder of how constant his presence had become in her life. "Good morning, my love," his message read, followed by a question she'd grown familiar with. "What's your plan for today?" At first, the habit felt endearing, a sign of his interest in her world. But as the days wore on, those simple questions began to feel more like obligations she couldn't escape. Emeka's love seemed boundless, but it came with strings attached. Strings that slowly began to tangle around Osinachi's independence. His unannounced visits to her workplace, once flattering, started to disrupt her day. He would arrive with excuses wrapped in charm, carrying lunch or flowers, but always with the same purpose: to see where she was and who she was with. "I just missed you," he'd say, his smile disarming. And yet, there was an unspoken expectation in his eyes that made her feel she needed to justify her every move. Osinachi tried to silence the voice in her head that questioned these gestures. After all, wasn't this what love looked like? Caring, attentive, present. Mama Ada, her wise and observant mother, saw things differently. During one of their afternoon talks, Mama Ada's voice carried a firm yet gentle tone. "My daughter," she began, "love doesn't mean control. Be careful that his affection isn't just a cage painted gold." But Osinachi brushed off her mother's concerns, choosing instead to believe in the goodness she saw in Emeka. Each day became a delicate balancing act. Osinachi navigated Emeka's growing need for reassurance while trying to hold on to her sense of self. She reassured herself that this phase would pass, that his intensity was simply proof of his devotion. But deep down, the weight of Mama Ada's words lingered. Was she confusing love with control? That question hung in the air like a storm cloud, one she wasn't ready to confront. Not yet. As the weeks went by, Emeka's actions became harder to ignore. What had once been sweet gestures now felt like subtle inspections of Osinachi's every move. He began calling her multiple times a day, his voice soft yet persistent as he asked for updates about her whereabouts. "It's just because I care," he'd say whenever she expressed hesitation, his words coated in reassurance. But the feeling of being constantly watched started to weigh on her, like an invisible net tightening around her freedom. One afternoon, Emeka showed up unexpectedly at her workplace again, his usual charm masking the tension beneath. This time, however, his visit didn't end with flowers or compliments. He questioned why she hadn't answered his last call, his tone sharper than she'd ever heard before. Osinachi felt a flicker of embarrassment under her coworker's curious stares. "I was busy with a client," she explained, her voice steady but her heart racing. He nodded, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and left with a lingering presence that stayed long after he was gone. At home that evening, Osinachi confided in Mama Ada, hoping for reassurance. But her mother's response was far from comforting. "My child, love should make you grow, not shrink. If his care feels like a shadow you can't escape, you need to listen to that feeling." Mama Ada's words struck a chord, Yet Osanachi clung to the hope that Emeka's behavior stemmed from love, not malice. "He just needs time to adjust," she replied, though even she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. The dynamic between them began to shift in small but undeniable ways. Emeka's questions turned into subtle accusations, his concern into veiled warnings. He wanted to know where she was, who she was with, and why she hadn't told him sooner. And every time she hesitated or faltered, he'd soften his tone, apologizing for being too protective. Yet beneath the surface, Osanachi felt the foundation of their relationship beginning to crack. She just couldn't yet admit how deeply those cracks ran. The breaking point came during what should have been a joyful evening. Osanachi had been invited to a small gathering with her colleagues, a chance to relax and unwind. Emeka, however, wasn't thrilled about her attending without him. "Why do you need to go to these things?" he asked, his tone deceptively light. When she insisted it was just a casual outing, his demeanor shifted. "Fine, but don't forget to call me when you get there," he said, his words carrying an unspoken edge. At the party, Osanachi tried to enjoy herself, but Emeka's messages kept interrupting her attempts at peace. "Who's there with you? How long will you be staying?" Each notification felt like a reminder that she wasn't truly free. Her coworkers noticed her distraction, gently teasing her about being too attached to her boyfriend. She smiled weakly, unwilling to explain the truth, that the constant messages weren't out of love but control. When she finally returned home, Emeka was waiting for her, his face unreadable. "Did you have fun?" he asked, his voice calm but his posture rigid. Before she could answer, he added, "You didn't tell me you'd be coming home this late." His words stung, not because of what he said, but because of the way they made her feel. Small, guilty, as though she had done something wrong. She apologized, though deep down she wasn't sure why she needed to. That night, as she lay in bed, Mama Ada's warnings echoed in her mind. Love wasn't supposed to feel like walking on eggshells, was it? And yet, Osanachi still clung to the hope that things would change. She believed in Emeka's love, even if it came with shadows she couldn't ignore. But as she stared at the ceiling, she couldn't help but wonder if Mama Ada was right. What if this wasn't love at all, but something far more dangerous disguised as care? The first time it happened, it was as though the world stopped spinning. Osanachi and Emeka had been arguing. A heated exchange about something so trivial she wouldn't even remember it later. What she did remember, however, was the sharp sting of his hand against her face and the silence that followed. The room, once filled with their voices, now felt suffocatingly quiet. Emeka's expression shifted instantly, horror replacing anger. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling. He reached for her, but she instinctively took a step back. That night, Emeka's apologies were relentless. He knelt before her, tears streaming down his face, promising it would never happen again. "I don't know what came over me," he said, clutching her hands as though letting go would break him. Osanachi wanted to believe him, to hold on to the image of the man who had once been her dream. "I forgive you," she murmured, her voice barely audible, more out of exhaustion than conviction. In her heart, she desperately wanted to believe it was a one-time mistake. But as time passed, the arguments grew more frequent, and the line Emeka had crossed became easier for him to step over. The violence was never planned. It came in flashes, quick, terrifying moments that left Osanachi stunned, and just as quickly as the storm arrived, it would pass, replaced by his familiar charm. He would bring her flowers, cook her favorite meals, and shower her with affection. It was a cycle, a painful rhythm that left her trapped between hope and despair. The home they had built together, once a sanctuary, became a battlefield. The walls bore witness to their struggles, the echoes of raised voices and muffled cries lingering long after the fights ended. Osanachi began to feel as though she were living two lives, one where she painted on a brave face for the world, and another where she silently endured the chaos behind closed doors. And yet, despite it all, a part of her still held on to the belief that Emeka could change. She told herself that love was about patience, about fighting for the person you cared for. But deep down, she started to question how much more she could endure. The cycle became a pattern, one that Osanachi could predict with unsettling precision. A small disagreement would spark, igniting Emeka's frustration like dry tinder to a flame. His words would cut sharp, leaving her scrambling to diffuse the tension. If that failed, the storm would break. A moment of violence, followed by his immediate regret. And then, as surely as the sunrise, his apologies would come. Each time, they felt more desperate, more rehearsed, yet Osanachi clung to them as though they were lifelines. Emeka's promises always sounded sincere, even when they echoed the same script as the time before. "I'll do better, my love," he would say, holding her close as though proximity could erase the bruises. "You're the only thing that matters to me." His words were a balm and a burden, keeping her tethered to the hope that this time he meant it. And in the quiet moments when he wasn't angry, when his laughter filled the room and his smile softened her heart, It was easy to believe he could change, but the toll on Osanachi was becoming impossible to ignore. The vibrant woman who had once lit up Abaya's streets now moved through her days with a heaviness that even the townspeople began to notice. Friends asked if she was okay, their concern genuine, but their questions deflected with practiced ease. "Just tired," she'd say, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. Inside, she felt trapped, her spirit shrinking with every passing day. Yet, she convinced herself that leaving wasn't an option. After all, wasn't enduring hardship part of love? One evening, after yet another fight that left her emotionally drained, Osanachi found herself staring into the mirror. Her reflection was a stranger, a woman with weary eyes and a forced smile. She touched her face, tracing the faint bruise along her cheekbone, a painful reminder of how far things had spiraled. In that moment, a question lingered in her mind, louder than ever before. Is this really love? But as the door opened and Emeka's voice called out, the thought was pushed aside once more. As the weeks turned into months, Osanachi began to notice the cracks in her own resilience. The woman who once stood tall, full of hope and determination, now felt like a shadow of her former self. She tiptoed around Emeka, carefully choosing her words and actions in an attempt to avoid his anger. But no matter how cautious she was, it seemed like something always triggered him. A misplaced item, a perceived slight, or even her silence. The unpredictability of his moods left her in a constant state of anxiety, a prisoner in her own home. Yet, Emeka's moments of kindness still held a strange power over her. On days when he was calm, he would hold her hand and speak about their future, painting vivid pictures of a life filled with happiness. "You're my everything, Osanachi," he'd say, his voice soft and convincing. Those words would temporarily erase the pain, filling her with a fragile hope that things might someday return to the way they were. But deep down, she knew that the love she was clinging to was no longer the same. It was fractured, warped by the weight of his actions. The nights were the hardest. Alone in the darkness, Osanachi would lie awake, replaying the events of the day in her mind. She would ask herself if there was something she could have done differently, a way to have avoided the outburst. Guilt and self-blame became her constant companions, even though a part of her knew she wasn't at fault. But admitting that would mean acknowledging the truth she wasn't ready to face, that she was trapped in a cycle of abuse, and no amount of love or patience could fix what was broken. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight spilled into their home, Osanachi stood by the window, gazing out at the world she once embraced so fully. The laughter of children playing in the streets below reached her ears, a bittersweet reminder of the life she had before Emeka. For the first time, a new thought crept into her mind. What if she deserved better? The idea was small, fragile, and easily overshadowed by her fears. But it was there, a glimmer of hope buried beneath the weight of her doubts. And though she wasn't ready to act on it yet, it marked the beginning of a shift, one that would slowly grow stronger with time. The birth of Kiyoma was a moment of pure light in Osanachi's darkening world. From the moment she held her daughter in her arms, a sense of purpose and love flooded her heart. Kiyoma's tiny fingers wrapped around hers, and for the first time in a long while, Osanachi felt hope. She promised herself that no matter what, she would give her child a better life, a life filled with the warmth and safety that had slowly slipped away from her own. The laughter of a newborn soon echoed through their home, temporarily masking the tension that still lurked in its corners. Emeka, too, seemed to change with Kiyoma's arrival. He doted on their daughter, holding her close and speaking to her in soft tones. For a fleeting moment, Osanachi allowed herself to believe that this was the turning point, that Kiyoma's presence had mended the fractures in their relationship. But the peace was short-lived. Emeka's temper, once hidden behind tender smiles, began to resurface. And now, with a child in the mix, the stakes felt even higher. The arguments returned, louder and more frequent than before. Emeka's frustrations, often fueled by alcohol, spilled over into their home. Osanachi tried to shield Kiyoma from the chaos, cradling her daughter and whispering lullabies to drown out the shouting. Her protective instincts were stronger than ever, but with each passing day, she felt her strength waver. The promise of a better life for Kiyoma seemed further out of reach, and guilt began to weigh heavily on her shoulders. One fateful night, the tension reached its breaking point. Emeka, intoxicated and enraged over something insignificant, lashed out in a way that would change their lives forever. Kiyoma, caught in the crossfire of his anger, was struck in a moment of careless fury. The room fell silent as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Osanachi's scream pierced the stillness, a sound of pure anguish that seemed to echo endlessly. In that instant, the fragile world she had been holding together shattered completely. The hours that followed were a blur of chaos and heartbreak. Osanachi clutched Kiyoma's lifeless body, her tears falling like a torrent, soaking her daughter's delicate features. She begged for her baby to wake up, whispering promises, prayers, and apologies. Emeka stood frozen, his face pale with shock as the weight of his actions bore down on him. I didn't mean to. I didn't, he stammered, but his words were drowned out by the grief that consumed Osinachi. In that moment, she felt as though her entire world had been ripped away. Neighbors, drawn by the sound of Osinachi's cries, gathered outside the home, their concerned murmurs filling the night air. Someone called for help, but deep down, Osinachi knew it was too late. As the realization settled, a cold, unyielding rage began to grow within her. She looked at Emeka, the man who had once promised her the world, and saw not a partner, but the person who had stolen everything from her. For the first time, there was no doubt in her mind. She could no longer stay. The days after Kiyoma's death were heavy with silence. Osinachi returned to her mother's house, her body moving mechanically as though she were a shell of herself. Mama Ada took her in without question, her arms offering the comfort that words could not. Together, they mourned the loss of the child who had brought them so much light, even in her short time on Earth. Mama Ada tried to coax Osinachi to speak, but her daughter remained locked in her grief, her mind replaying the events of that night over and over. Each passing day brought a new wave of pain, but also the faintest glimmers of clarity. Osinachi began to see the years of her relationship with Emeka for what they truly were, a slow erosion of her happiness, her confidence, and her sense of self. The guilt she had carried for so long started to shift, no longer directed inward, but at the man who had torn her life apart. And with that shift came the seed of a decision, fragile but growing. She would not allow Emeka to destroy any more of her future. Osinachi's resolve began to solidify the morning she sat by Kiyoma's small, freshly covered grave. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth, and the sky hung low, mirroring the weight in her heart. She traced the name etched into the stone, her fingers trembling as she whispered a promise. I will honor you, my child. I will never let your light be forgotten. In that moment, she made the decision to reclaim her life, not just for herself, but for Kiyoma, whose short existence deserved to leave a lasting mark. Returning to Mama Ada's home brought a bittersweet mix of comfort and shame. Osinachi had left this place full of hope and dreams, and now she returned, broken and burdened by loss. But her mother's unwavering support became her anchor. You are stronger than you know, Mama Ada reminded her, cupping her daughter's face with care. What happened does not define you. It is what you choose to do now that will. Those words began to chip away at the self-doubt that had consumed Osinachi for years. Emeka, meanwhile, made no attempt to reach out. Whether it was guilt or cowardice that kept him away, Osinachi didn't care. His absence was both a relief and a reminder of the void he had created in her life. Slowly, she began to piece herself back together, leaning on her mother and the quiet strength of her community. Friends and neighbors, aware of her loss, rallied around her, offering words of encouragement and acts of kindness that reminded her she was not alone. Though the pain of Kiyoma's absence would never fully fade, it became a part of Osinachi's story, a scar that marked her survival. She realized that her grief, though unbearable, carried within it the power to transform her life. It was the fuel that would drive her to make changes, to find purpose, and to ensure that no other woman would endure what she had. And so, as the sun set on another day, Osinachi stood taller, her heart heavy, but her spirit unbroken. This was not the end. It was a new beginning, born from tragedy, but filled with the promise of hope. The first step toward healing was the hardest for Osinachi, acknowledging her own strength. In the weeks following Kiyoma's death, she often felt like she was walking through a haze, her days blending into each other. But Mama Ada's gentle encouragement kept her moving forward, one step at a time. Pain does not mean the end, her mother would say, her voice steady and full of conviction. Those words became a mantra for Osinachi, a reminder that even in the depths of her grief, she had the power to rise again. Slowly, she began to find solace in sharing her story. At first, it was just with a few trusted friends in the village, their quiet support giving her the courage to speak more openly. Each time she recounted her journey, her love for Kiyoma, her struggles with Emeka, and the strength it took to leave, it felt as though a weight was being lifted from her chest. To her surprise, other women began to open up too, their stories echoing her own. What had once felt like an isolating pain became a shared bond, a collective call for change. Osinachi realized that her voice could be a beacon for others trapped in silence. She began organizing small gatherings in her community, inviting women to come together and share their experiences. In these meetings, they found not only support, but also empowerment. Osinachi's message was clear. Love is not meant to hurt, and no one deserves to endure abuse in the name of devotion. With each session, she felt her purpose solidify, her grief transforming into a mission that gave her life new meaning. Mama Ada watched with pride as her daughter stepped into this new role, her wisdom and compassion shining brighter than ever before. "You are turning your pain into power," she told Osinachi one evening as they prepared for another gathering. "Kiyoma would be so proud of you." Those words struck a deep chord, filling Osinachi with both sorrow and determination. Though she could not undo the past, she vowed to honor her daughter's memory by creating a future where women could live without fear. As Osinachi's voice grew stronger, so did her influence. Women from neighboring villages began to hear about her gatherings and traveled long distances to attend. Each meeting became a sanctuary, a space where pain was shared, lessons were learned, and strength was rebuilt. Osinachi's honesty about her own struggles gave others the courage to confront their own realities. "Your worth is not measured by someone else's love," she would say, her words resonating deeply with those who had endured similar hardships. The transformation in Osinachi was undeniable. Where once there had been fear and doubt, now there was confidence and purpose. She began to see herself not as a victim, but as a survivor, a woman who had weathered the storm and come out stronger on the other side. Her journey inspired others to find their own strength, creating a ripple effect that reached far beyond her small village. What had started as a personal healing process had grown into a movement, one that challenged the cycle of silence and suffering. Osinachi's relationship with her mother also deepened during this time. Mama Ada, who had always been her pillar of support, became her partner in this mission. Together, they worked tirelessly to educate women about their rights, emphasizing the importance of self-respect and boundaries in relationships. Mama Ada's wisdom, rooted in years of experience, complemented Osinachi's heartfelt passion, making them a formidable team. Their bond, forged through shared loss and resilience, became a source of inspiration for everyone around them. But Osinachi's journey was not without its challenges. There were moments when the weight of her grief threatened to pull her under. Memories of Kiyoma would surface unexpectedly, bringing with them a tidal wave of sorrow. Yet, even in those moments, Osinachi found strength in her mission. She reminded herself that her pain was not in vain. It was the foundation upon which she was building a better future, not just for herself, but for countless others. And with each step forward, she felt Kiyoma's spirit guiding her, a constant source of light in her darkest moments. With time, Osinachi's efforts began to spark real change. Women who once lived in fear found the courage to leave toxic relationships, and the community itself started to shift its perspective on love and respect. Men, too, began attending her gatherings, some seeking to understand their own behaviors, and others wanting to support the women in their lives. What had begun as a deeply personal journey for Osinachi had grown into a collective transformation, weaving together a tapestry of healing and hope that touched every corner of the village. One particularly emotional day, a young woman approached Osinachi after a meeting. Her voice trembled as she shared her story, mirroring so much of what Osinachi had endured. But what struck Osinachi most was the woman's gratitude. "Because of you, I found the strength to leave," she said, tears streaming down her face. The words filled Osinachi with a profound sense of purpose, affirming that her pain had not been in vain. In helping others, she was also healing herself, piece by piece. Osinachi also began incorporating Kiyoma's memory into her work, using her story as a powerful reminder of the stakes involved in staying silent. She spoke about her daughter not with bitterness, but with love and reverence, ensuring that Kiyoma's light continued to shine through the lives she touched. "Kiyoma taught me what it means to love unconditionally," she would say, her voice steady. "And in her honor, I want to make sure no one has to suffer in silence again." Her words, raw and genuine, left a lasting impact on all who heard them. Though the road ahead was still long, Osinachi felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She had reclaimed her life, not by forgetting her pain, but by embracing it and allowing it to fuel her purpose. The journey had been fraught with heartbreak, but it had also given her a resilience she never thought possible. And as she stood before another group of women one quiet evening, the setting sun casting a warm glow over the gathering, she realized one undeniable truth. Her story was not just one of survival, but of triumph, hope, and unshakable strength. Thank you for staying with us and listening to Osinachi's powerful story. Her journey reminds us that love without respect is not love at all, and that we all deserve relationships that nurture, not harm. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to reflect and share your thoughts. Let us know in the comments which part of her journey impacted you the most. Also, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your city and country. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story like this one. Together, we can spread awareness, inspire change, and create a community of strength and support. Thank you for being part of this conversation. And remember, your story matters. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.